we run this as an old-fashioned public meeting, and that means that you are very much our whole reason for being here, and the panelists know that they will be discussing with you as well as giving us their briefing. So it's very much about our audience tonight. But obviously, we thought we should begin in Cairo. So if I can just, for the interest of keeping it moving, thank you for coming. And we'll get to more issues as we go along. But we're going to join Tariq Osman, as you can hear, who is author of Egypt on the Brink, From Nasser to Mubarak. And we're about to find out for ourselves how this internet connection in Cairo is.
Hello?
Hello, Tariq.
Hi.
Welcome to the Frontline Club. There's 100 of us here, and we all say hello to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Tell us where you've been in the last 2 hours, and give us your situation report, Tariq.
Well, last hour at home, actually, after a really long few days. Before that was in Mustafa Mahmoud Square, which is the main square that held today the pro-Mubarak demonstration, and then after that tried to reach Tahrir Square, where there were some clashes between the pro and anti Mubarak demonstrations, but it was extremely difficult actually to get to see the real action. So we managed to see a little bit on the fringes, if you'd like.
Yeah, and we don't like what at all, actually. We've heard from people who were there. There's at least 300 dead so far, buildings on fire, strange reports of policemen without uniform being bussed in to look as supporters of Mubarak. How is it possible to tell who is who in the pro-Mubarak group?
It's really tough because at the end of the day, it's an extremely fluid situation. What we do know, let's put it this way, what we do know is that until late last night, it was a very, relatively calm situation in Tahrir Square. Right after, Tahrir Square is, as you know, the center where the anti-Mubarak demonstrations have been taking place for the past week. After President Mubarak gave his very emotional speech late last night, some small demonstrations pro-Mubarak actually started to come out in the street. I can certainly tell that some of them are certainly genuine. I personally know some people who were moved by his speech and wanted to say, we more or less accept what he has said, and it's fine that the transition period or period of transition will take 5-6 months. But then today, we woke up in the morning, in the early hours, of the major demonstration taking place in Mustafa Mahmoud Square. That's the one I mentioned, the one I wanted to go and see. But then, out of the blue, really, another demonstration was moving towards Tahrir Square, where the anti-Mubarak demonstrations were taking place. But we don't really know where that started from, and it's really weird because that demonstration had horses and camels in it, which is something very, very weird to see in Cairo. I'm sorry if it's very haphazard, but I'm just trying to recollect after a few very, very tense days.
No, thank you. It's not haphazard. We're all here to listen. In fact, if you bear with us, would anyone in the room like to ask a question? We will close this line down and re-establish it. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, hello. My name is Anna Pereira. I'm a children's author, and I've written a book about Guantanamo Bay called Guantanamo Boy. And I've got a new book out on March
I'm sorry to interrupt. I actually cannot hear anything.
Sorry.
Can you just raise your voice slightly?
My new teen novel is out March the 3rd, and it's set in Cairo, and it deals with the Coptic Christian community, the Abulhimal. Have they been part of the demonstrations, do you know?
Sorry, what I've heard was, did you ask me about the Muslim Brotherhood? Was that the question?
I asked you about the Abulhimal.
Okay, I'll relay it. The question is, have the Coptic Christians in any way been caught up in an obvious way on one side or the other?
No, the simple answer is no. There wasn't any clear move from the church, if you'd like. The Pope Shenouda III, the Egyptian Coptic Pope, has actually given a very balanced, I would say politically correct speech a few days ago, actually 2 nights ago, and what was immediately followed by another very balanced, politically correct speech from the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar. But it was very balanced, as I said. So it wasn't really an endorsement of President Mubarak or an endorsement of the protesters. It was basically trying to say, please avoid chaos, nothing more.
Okay.
What was clear, however, is that the Kifaya movement, Kifaya is enough, the enough movement, which was extremely active on the Egyptian street over the past 4 or 5 years, anti-Mubarak, specifically anti the hereditary scenario, the scenario of Gamal Mubarak becoming the next president of Egypt. That movement was led by, or one of its very, very prominent figures was Mr. George Ishaq, an Egyptian Christian political activist and journalist, actually. And he was very prominent over the past few days in making his views very clear, and
Okay, thank
he
you.
was Tahrir Square.
Right, thanks, Tariq. We're going to dial you again in an hour, and if our audience have other questions, and if you're there, we'll put them to you. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So let's turn to the panel. Would you kindly, starting with you, Jane, introduce yourself up to a minute, no more, and then give us your headline, and down the panel in the same way.
Sure. So hello everyone, I'm Jane Kinninmont. I work at the Economist Intelligence Unit, where I'm the Associate Director for the Middle East and Africa, focusing on both the politics and economics of the Middle East. I last visited Cairo in November. I guess what I find particularly interesting about the events this year, we've seen 4 Arab governments fall in the space of 5 weeks. And particularly the events in Tunisia and Egypt are having really a seismic effect on the opposition across the region. Every Arab country has its opposition groups. They're very diverse, they tend to be very fragmented and very weak. But almost without exception, they are feeling inspired and they're feeling emboldened by what's happening. That is going to have huge effects. In the last 5 years, we've seen very little pressure, either internal or external, for further democratization in the Arab world. I think that's now changing. I would like to steal some words from a Bahraini activist friend of mine who I met on Wednesday in Manama, who said, okay, the ripple effects may take years to come through, but khalas, meaning it's done, the barrier of fear is broken. And that phrase I've heard recurring from a lot of people in the last few days, including Mohammed al-Baradei, this idea that the barrier of fear is gone now.
I'm Davis Lewin. I'm the head of programs at a think tank called the Henry Jackson Society, and it just struck me as I came in here with apologies with seconds to spare that we're really in a situation where I thought that it's almost bad, you know, thank God for Tariq, that it's almost bad that I didn't have time to check my BlackBerry, because we're sitting up here and it could be changing by the second. It's so fluid. So you know, for me it's kind of difficult to talk about. We could potentially talk about how we got here. In terms of talking about where we're going, it's very, very tentative. So my headline would be absolutely momentous. Let's keep in mind the events that are happening in the Middle East right now are absolutely momentous, certainly the biggest in my lifetime that have happened. And I think the consequences of that are going to take out over a very long time. But I would join Jane in welcoming that the barrier of fear has been broken, but at the same time urge a note of caution, whereby we all know that revolution can go various ways. If we see the Iranian example, I don't want to see the new leadership of Egypt, which I expect there may well be one, end up in London in 2 years with the Muslim Brotherhood in power. I think that would be something very dangerous. I'm sure we'll discuss further, but I think those would be my headline thoughts.
And if you are plugged into the wider world and you've got news from the respected sources, please interrupt the proceedings as we're going along.
Hello everyone, and thanks for coming. My name is Mustafa Abulhimal. My surname is a bit difficult, so stick with Mustafa for now. I'm a research fellow at Quilliam Foundation, based here in London. I lived most of my life in Egypt, and my headline would be, I'm sad and happy actually for what's happening in Egypt. Obviously sad for the scenes we've all seen and probably sad for the old reasons that everyone is sharing with me here, that seeing people killed for actually what they are fighting for, and happy again for the fear factor that is disappearing from people's mind, and understanding actually that understanding what happened in relation to perspective to this fear factor. I would say Egyptians rediscovered. They rediscovered themselves. They rediscovered their ability. They have a voice needs to be heard. And my statement would be: I hope that everyone would actually hear people's voice and not politicians' voice. For the first time in the Middle East, that people would consider what people say, not what their statesmen say. Thank you.
Hi. I'm Mohammed Yahya. I'm editor of online and interactive programs at BBC Arabic. I started working as a journalist in 1990, a few days after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And since then I've been covering news in the Middle East, in Egypt, and a bit in the Balkans in the mid-90s. We're all struggling to understand what's going on in Egypt and what's going to happen. And I'll pick on something that I've heard a few minutes ago, that we've heard from our audience as well. The word broke the barrier of fear, and it looks to us from the messages and the interaction we're having with our audience is that people in the Middle East, it's all of a sudden it dawned on them that they don't have to live like this. There is another opportunity. They can change something. Now we're all weighing up all the possibilities, whether it's going to be a real move to democracy or whether something more sinister will come out. Personally, I'm optimistic, and I think we are about to witness a historic change in the region and indeed in the whole world, and I believe it's going to be for the better.
Thank you all very much. Anyone at this early stage wants to chip in from the room? Yes, good. And please say who you are. And you're welcome to make a statement or a question, and wait for the microphone.
Hi, my name is Stefano Carini, and I am a student of photography at London College of Communication. We heard that in Jordan as well there were protests going on, but we don't get that much on the news anymore because obviously Egypt is attracting all of the attentions. Do you have any information about the situation in Jordan and maybe Yemen as well? Is it the protest still going on?
Well, yesterday the king reacted basically by dissolving the government, which has only been in power for 2 months, and forming a new one. Prior to that, when the protests had first started, they announced $500 million of new subsidies. So I think this is a pattern that we're basically seeing everywhere, is not economic reform, but populist economic policies, and some kind of basically cosmetic political reforms. Yemen also, they announced a bunch of economic reforms, including, you'll be glad to know, scrapping student tuition fees. So if you want to do your masters in Yemen, maybe that will be a appealing option. And the president has also said that he will stand down at the next election, but we have heard him say that also before the last election.
Can I just, I mean, I can't add anything to the facts, but I just want to sharpen that a little. I would call it emergency measures. What we're seeing is the ripple effect, immediate. There are bread riots in Jordan on what we could call a regular basis to some extent, but this is entirely different. It's a ripple effect, and emergency action. He's dissolved the government, and he's going to hope that he can hang on.
Besides actually Yemen and Jordan, I've heard also from friends in Syria and Algeria. There will be they're calling for mass protests in the 5th and in the 5th of February and the 12th of February in Syria and Algeria. And whether this is domino effect or not, we'll have to wait for another couple of weeks to see.
I think when we're talking about domino effect, we need to be careful to look at each country individually, because we cannot generalize, and we need to look at for instance, in Jordan, the monarchy is very stable, and even the strongest opposition, the Islamist opposition, do not call for the king to go, and they want the king to remain. So you have to look at each country separately. And
we'll make sure to do that this evening. You're next, to the back. And whilst you're waiting, Kuwait, I heard that the king is giving, or the emir is giving $3,500 a month.
That was right after the Tunisian revolt.
So that's Kuwait for you. To the back.
Luke Douglas-Hume, freelance. 2 nights ago, just by chance, I was speaking to an Egyptian couple, and they were just amazed by this, just totally amazed, and said, when we left just 4 days ago, it was normal. This has come out of nowhere. And then just now, just a moment ago, you mentioned that for 5 years...
Use the microphone, Luke, or I'll
for
come over.
5 years, enough had been really working the streets of Cairo. So you're saying that actually been building up for 5 years. So where, if any, is the a thread, and where did it start?
Okay,
to understand it.
And yes, thank you for that. Will you give us a sense of the shock that you feel? I mean, I believe you were a student in Cairo, and, you know, please respond to Luke. He's asking you to be human about this and then use the head. So let's go down the panel this way. Tell us about the shock and then where it came from, and we'll come down to it.
I'll tell you that a correspondent for the BBC, after the events in Tunisia, went out on the streets in Egypt to the poorer neighborhoods and asked people, do you think, you know, the same can happen in Cairo? Do you want change? And he was met by overwhelming apathy. And people were just saying, oh, we're okay, Mubarak is okay, we have food. So 25th was really a shock. And I think it's a testament to how detached from reality all the observers and even the government was. And I believe that the anger and the dissatisfaction was building up over years and even decades, and it was bottled inside, just waiting for a trigger to blow. And this is what's happening.
I would say also in the last 5 years, in addition to what you said, Mohammed, that besides Kifaya, we have the 6th of April movement, and we have about 200 strikes, small-scale strikes, in every corner of the country, which were not, I think, widely reported probably in the Western media, but I think the frustration with actually smaller attempts of strike and making the voices louder and louder, all this has been accumulated, all what it needed, a Facebook group, basically, just to spark up.
Can you give us a sense of what it means to you, what it feels in your heart? You grew up in Egypt. Will you tell Luke how you're...
I mean, this is quite difficult for me, obviously, having been there until 3 years ago, and having actually my family still there, and talking to my niece the other day, and she was crying, basically. She's only about 4 or 5 years old. And she's frightened. She doesn't really understand what's happening. But at the same time, when I talked to her mom afterwards, and I told her, I think those kids will hopefully have a better life than the ones we all had. Unfortunately, it's quite costly. Unfortunately, we have hundreds of people have been killed. But I believe it's time for change, not necessarily in a revolutionary way, but Mubarak himself, he did not create any political rivalry. He did not create political culture for people to generate other opposition groups. And unfortunately, he's paying for this price now.
Where did it come from, and will you give us you said momentous, but spell it out.
Well, I mean, if I can just say on that, I'm not going to be going anywhere near the emotive stuff, because it's not my emotive area in a way, but in terms of analysis, we're talking about a gigantic intelligence failure, in my view, and a gigantic policy failure that we probably should discuss in some detail about where Western policy has gone wrong, because, of course, Western policy is immensely implicated in it to an extent.
So, I mean, will the audience allow you to wash your hands of it emotively, given that we supported...
No, I didn't mean to say wash my hands of it. I'm merely saying, out of respect for the commendable way that he presented it, having family links, that I'm not going to be emotively involved on that level, because I don't.
Well, let's have a show of hands. The West has a case to answer. Hands up. The West does not have a case to answer. Hands up. So you can emote all you like. You can emote all you like. Over to you, Jane.
I mean, the root causes of the unhappiness have been building up for years, but they have been getting worse. I think it was always clear that there would be risks and problems in 2011. We were already seeing it begin to deter, for example, foreign investment into Egypt, but people's attentions previously were focused on September, when the presidential election was due. There was the question around whether the president would take that opportunity to install his son. This protest on January 25th had been planned for a long time, but wasn't expected to be big. What changed recently was Tunisia. That did actually show people that demonstrations could change things.
Right, now I propose that we come back to some of these issues. I promise to return to them. You want us to spell out, don't just say every country's the same. You want us to discuss the domino effect very clearly. You want us to discuss the intelligence failure. I'm going to take some more questions from us, but I promise to bring these themes out before we leave. But do try and remember that we won't lose the important matters, but you're important to us as well. So you're first, you're second, you're third.
Hi, Camilla Sheck from the Media Standards Trust. We track quite a lot of news on a weekly basis using a database called Journalisted. What I can't help but notice was at the moment the lack of stuff being written about Saudi Arabia, but I noticed on the Jon Snow Twitter feed that he was already trying to source people out there saying what's going on in Saudi Arabia, and someone had said they've been confiscating satellite phones from expats. There were a higher number of police more than usual on last Friday's prayers, and I was just wondering if any of you had heard any more about the regime sort of slightly getting kind of obviously nervous there as well in Saudi.
Absolutely. I mean, I gather the public in Saudi Arabia have been glued to the TV. I was talking yesterday to two friends that had just come back. King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia was probably the most outspoken of the Arab leaders to speak out and back Mubarak. What is interesting is I think we do need to look particularly hard at the risks in countries where there's a question around the succession and where the ruler is ageing. Now, in Saudi Arabia, the king is ageing. He's been out of the country for most of the past 6 months, and people, whether they're working in foreign policy, diplomacy, or working in, say, the oil sector, are saying that there is a kind of paralysis when it comes to policy making because it's a top-down place and the top level isn't functioning all that well. The next three people in line to the throne are also on the older side, and there are, who knows if it's speculation, but there are kind of concerns about the health of all of them. So I think that is a big flashpoint. I think it will be interesting to see whether any of the next generation of princes that could be in line to the throne might actually try to make some common cause with some of the reformers. Generally in Saudi Arabia, people call for quite limited reform. They're not actually as ambitious as in a lot of other countries. I would think we could see changes there.
A linked question here and then to the back.
It's very funny you asked that question because I wanted to ask a similar question about Saudi Arabia and the more extreme regimes like Libya as well. My name is Olivia Toy. I work at a strategy consulting firm called Monitor Group, and I actually had a month working in Libya. We were working for a section of the government that they were accountable to the General People's Committee. And what surprised me the most was whenever the General People's Committee was brought up, I was sort of like, oh gosh, they can't mention the word government. But they just sort of would actually laugh about it just because they found it sort of a joke that, yeah, okay, we have no power, but who cares? They were just incredibly complacent about it. So I wanted to ask, in regimes like Saudi, like Libya, what do you think, do you really think the ripple effect is going to have that big a wave and get that far?
Right, now, Mohammed, I suspect you want our friend to stop using phrases like Saudi Arabia and like Libya. Would you like to make your pitch for the anti-domino effect? And I'm coming to the room next.
Well, actually, I just said a few minutes ago that we need to look at each country on its own. But there are common threads between all of these countries. I'll give you a story just to explain this. On our website, we publish debate forums, which we put, a topic. It ranges from, the serious political issues to Valentine's Day and football and everything. And one thing we've noticed is that in many of these forums, the debate turns into criticism to Arab leaders. It's as if, people in the Middle East blame Arab leaders for everything from failure in football to commercial to consumerism societies so there is a common thread. People are fed up, and the internet opened new opportunities for people and the media. For instance, in Saudi Arabia, recently we did something about women's rights in Saudi Arabia, and we heard from women inside Saudi Arabia criticizing the establishment. And I was astonished because, for me, this was the first time I hear this voice. A woman inside Saudi Arabia, on air, openly talking to millions of people, criticizing the religious establishment.
So, okay, to the back of the room with the microphone, and then we'll come to the front, and you're next. Yep.
Hi, my question is in many ways linked to Saudi Arabia, and I just want to ask, how long do you think the Saud family has? And what are the implications for things like the price of oil and the financial markets of what is going on in the Middle East? Okay,
so oil's at a 2-year high today. And what's the implication for the Saudi royal family? Do you want to take this or not?
I think this is probably Jane's area. I'll just say one comment about the domino effect again. Even though if it's not actually on governmental level, so in popular level, I think We can see already the governmental reforms are taking place, and we can see that people are, again, I think the issue of rediscovering actually the power of people, not only in sensational way, but the absence of political culture in most of the region. We have to admit that this was the problem, and blaming the leaders for everything is actually a problem that has been generated from this passive attitude. So what we can see is, at least if there's no other revolution, other uprising, or other violent clashes or anything, each individual, or at least many individuals, would reconsider their abilities and their capacities, I think, in a way. And now the economic analysis.
Well, the question is, how long does the Saudi royal family have?
I mean, I would say a long time, because I think when reform comes, it is going to be something like a transition to a constitutional monarchy, that the easiest thing to do will be to try to weaken and limit the powers of the monarchy, not to overthrow it completely. People have been predicting the overthrow of the Al Saud since at least the 1950s, but I think while the oil's still there, they'll probably still be there too.
Okay, so the price of oil, do you want anyone comment on that? I mean, it's not going down. I was a Wall Street reporter for 7 years. It's not going down. You know, so do you want to say anything, David?
No, I would, if I may, very quickly like to say something on the ripple effect as well.
Please.
I think, of course, it's completely true in terms of keeping each country as a separate entity and analyzing it like that, but there is something to it, and I think the key word is the media and internet, like you say. I mean, the media in this, since the start of the war on terror, every conference you go to, we have to talk about the media, the role of the media. Now we really need to talk about the role of the media.
Right. So in the fall of the communist states in 1989, would the internet have been an accelerant? What took 5 years, if you argue about it, or would the internet have accelerated that process in the way that a process is being accelerated?
I mean, let me go back quickly to the Egyptian example and actually seeing the internet effect in what happened in the last few weeks. This was something that was completely ignored by the media observers, because in Egypt, because media is closely watched actually by the government and by the police. People have been calling for this event January 25th of January on Tuesday, and people was like, yeah, you have like 200,000 have liked it, or have said they're going to attend this event, and people obviously didn't take this seriously. It started maybe with few thousand, started with hundreds of thousands, but the reporting of Facebook and reporting and tweeting and all this online has even motivated people and calling people, if you are sitting on Facebook, get out of the street and do what you have to do. And that's why on Friday they had to shut it down.
Okay, let's go around the audience now.
Yes, hi, my name is Magda Walter. I'm a former journalist. My question is about Israel. I wanted to ask, and I know that this is going to call for a highly speculative answer, probably, but it's just an interesting thing to entertain, whether this could be a game-changing moment for the whole intractability of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Okay, we're all very busy. We'll take that first. That's big enough. David?
I mean, that's a huge topic, but let me split it into two separate bits that are important. The first important bit is the Israelis are actually quite often ahead of others in terms of saying that we support somebody like Mubarak because it provides a kind of stability that they feel more secure with than they would with a democratic alternative, because they appreciate that you don't know what happens in the transition. But of course, we're talking about the entire southern region from Israel downwards, in a cold manner with a cold peace, but pacified to a small extent. There are other problems that we don't have time to discuss in Sinai and so on, but really it's up in the air now, and the Israelis are no doubt extremely worried about what's going to happen.
And the concern about Israel is that you're Christian, or you want to change it?
Well, no, please don't. Well, you have to come back at the end.
Just a quick comment on Israel, because obviously the big issue and related to possible transition groups could take over the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'm pretty sure this topic would come up later. But Israel's concerns are quite legitimate in a way, because they've supported Mubarak, they're quite happy with Mubarak and his regime, and everything was peaceful in governmental level. While I think if anything would happen in the future, I think what the Israelis should do in the future is actually start selling peace to the people, not only to governments, and start actually to believe that stability could also be parallel with democracy. And if they manage to convince the Egyptians more than their government that they could be a friendly neighbor, I think the Egyptians would be happy. Obviously, after a Palestinian deal, and that's another big topic. I don't think we have time for it now.
What did you want to add?
Me?
Yeah?
Yeah, well, I had one more half sentence to add. which
It's
would
all right.
make
Well,
the
we'll
question different.
we'll take the microphone from there and we'll give you your half. If it's not a good half sentence, you're really in
Well,
trouble.
actually, I think it's pretty damn good. What I wanted to say is, could it be game-changing in the sense, and forgive me for being simplistic, but I think there's a reason to ask this question, in the sense that a lot of authoritarian leaders in the Arab world may have focused their disaffected public's attention on a common enemy rather than on potential constructive solutions to the conflict. So that's what I wanted to ask. And so it's not just about Egypt, and it's not just about Mubarak, but it's about a real game change that we haven't seen one before.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. I think the Egyptian government on one hand was pursuing peace with Israel, but on the other hand trying to deflect from that by making people hate Israel by allowing quite a lot of anti-Semitism in the state media and so on. I was actually waiting to see how long it would be before somebody official came out and blamed Zionists for the current riots, and I was reliably informed by a friend in Cairo today that state TV was saying, yes, these revolutionaries, they've been trained in America by the Jews.
So in the past 30 years, U.S. has provided funding in the kind of name of aid to Egypt to sponsor the secret services in Egypt as well as the army. Over the past 10 years, this has averaged 1.8 billion pounds per annum for the secret services and the army. We heard that 4 days ago, the Mubarak actually changed the constitution slightly and created the role of a vice president, put the head of the secret service as a vice president and the head of the army as a premier. Given that now he's going to step down and he's asked pretty much the kind of his lackeys to set the process for creating, if you like, a transition to a more meaningful democratic representation, people representation. To what extent really are we going to have people representation or the will of the Egyptian people, and to what extent are we going to have a political change that is going to be doctored by the United States of America so that it will be friendly to Israel?
And your name and your interest?
My name is Pendar and I'm Iranian.
I didn't ask you to say where you're from, but you're, what an interesting interest. So, the people or a bunch of old cronies backed by the West? Who wants to start there?
Well, one thing that came out of the WikiLeaks story is that most Arab leaders are, in reality, on very good terms, to put it this way, with the U.S. and with Israel, and see Iran as the enemy. And this is something that everybody knew, but it came out. We finally had proof about it. And if Tunisia or Egypt or whichever country turns into a democratic system, my prediction is that it would be a pragmatic administration that would look after the interests of its people first. And it may not be as friendly as the current regimes to Israel and to the U.S., but it will deal pragmatically with the situation and try to look after its people and do what is best.
But is it in the balance for our friend? He's saying, how will we know and how soon will we know?
No, how soon? That's a big question. I think it's quite difficult. I think we hope actually. If we have the scenario of a proper transition where actually people's voices are being heard properly and their choices are put forward legitimately, and there be constitutional changes and we have proper parliament and proper elections within the 9 months or something, I'm quite confident that people's choices will be quite representative of what they want.
I wonder if President Mubarak, whilst sitting it out, is exposing the fact that the opposition people are not coordinating, and that you might have a lot of people on the streets because of Facebook, but if they don't have one or two plans or one or two leaders, they can just throw rocks, can't they? Isn't this a very shrewd strategy by Mubarak? Because our friend's saying, if he leaves it long enough, there'll just be another bunch of people wearing different suits but similarly linked to other interests outside the country.
I would say, I would imagine a different scenario actually in this. I would say that the last few weeks, or actually the last 5 years, if I want to go back to the last 5-6 years, where we have people who have been politically oppressed, not individuals, but political figures. Whether we agree with them, we like them, or dislike them, but we have figures like al-Baradei, we have figures like Ayman Noor, we have figures like Osama al-Ghazali Harb, and many other names who possibly not political celebrities, but they have solid grounds in Egypt. but they're obviously not giving any platform to express themselves.
The quality of debate at the Frontline Club is usually such that you can take a step back. So let's take a step back and talk about this word transition, right? Because a transition to something that we're hoping for, whilst I agree that I share your vision, where are the civil society structures that are in place? Where is the groundwork that needs to be done? How is this going to work from one day to the next with unexpected protests? I don't believe that it is going to work, and I believe it's a serious danger just because that groundwork for transition that should have been laid through Western policy for many years has not been laid.
So there's no civil society that's necessary to allow a new regime to run Egypt?
Well, other than the Muslim Brotherhood, who are presumably well organized enough to...
I would say we have enough communists, we have enough I mean, this might be shocking to many, but we have enough leftists, communists, liberals, socialists, Islamists who would actually fill in the gap with a coalition government.
Okay, and would you like it in on this, Joan? Shall we move along?
Yeah, I mean, I agree on that. I think there's a lot of intelligent, well-educated, smart Egyptians that could do a lot. The fact that, okay, the civil society is weak after, 6 decades of repression, but if they've built what they've built under that repression, I think there is potential. But I do think the army's role is a big risk. I think there is still a risk of a military takeover under a kind of camouflage of some constitutional reform. And even if there is a democratic transition, if we look at other examples like Algeria and Turkey, where the army's been very powerful, it has taken a long time to get them to step back from politics.
Is that food for thought? Are you happy with where it's coming from? More to be discussed?
Yeah, certainly, but I certainly hope that the will of the Egyptian people will prevail, but my worry is that the people don't have any leaders, really,
right.
From one or two al-Baradis or random people. And
okay,
the Muslim Brotherhood is kind of demonized, so...
Right, let's make sure we return to the will of the people and the Muslim Brotherhood. That's to you now.
You have answered part
using the microphone.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jessie Harrington. I'm a member of the public. I wanted to ask you...
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. You have partially answered my question, but not accurately. I wanted to ask, who are the contenders of power in Egypt? What is the army's involvement? Which side will the army take? And what is the possibility of the protection of the minority rights? That is, it's like after the takeover. Like, what will happen? Do we know any theories, anything on that, please?
Thank you for your question. This is a public meeting. We hope you come back many times. That's the first thing to say. Who wants to tackle that briefly?
Well, I'll tell you from a personal experience, because I was conscripted for 14 months in the Egyptian army. And the Egyptian army, it's the people look at it in a very romantic way as the defender of the country, the good soldiers, the people. I mean, they would never like crush demonstrators or no officer or soldier in the army can imagine himself. There's a long history of antagonism between the army and the police, where the army sees themselves as the more pure form of military, and they look at the police as sort of the thugs and the police sees themselves as oh, these are we are the real guardians of the security, and they don't know what they're talking about. So I mean, the army, I think, will remain neutral, and there is no tendency in the army to seize power or to do a military coup or anything like that. The army, the higher echelons of the army wanted to remain as a sort of a national pride, protector of the country, a neutral force. And I believe that the civil society in Egypt has a lot of qualified people who can form a government, who can create something that is workable. And on the contrary, I do not think that the Muslim Brotherhood have enough expertise and caliber of people to form any sort of government.
Right. We've come here, all of us, for a briefing, and to meet a man who was conscripted into the Egyptian army. Thank you very much for telling us that. If you'd been one of these boys in the tanks, what would you have done? They're about 10, as far as I can see, 10 years old. These young men in the tanks, they're sitting there surrounded by rock throwers. What must that be like in there?
One of our audience called us and said when the army first was deployed in Tahrir Square, one of the people in the demonstrators went to a soldier on a tank and asked him, are you going to shoot us? And the officer told him, we would never shoot you. Even if they court-martialed me and they executed me, I would never pull my gun on you. So I would do the same if I was there.
And you were, in a way, and timing was different.
Yep.
Now, the second part of Jessica's question, Jessica, was name names, all right? So one of you name names, and then we'll move on. And then we've obviously got to discuss...
And minority rights.
OK, names and minority rights.
I've mentioned a number of names already. Again, they might not be very well known in the Western media, but besides al-Barada'i, we have Osama al-Ghazali Harb, we have Ayman Noor, who ran for presidency in 2005 and who was already willing to run for presidency in 2011. We have Osama al-Ghazali Harb, who are also a liberal figure. I can't name, for instance, a Muslim Brotherhood, because I know this is something that keeps urging us to talk about Muslim Brotherhood. I can't name a figure that I would say this will stand out as a Muslim Brotherhood candidate. We have other communist leaders or leftist leaders who might not be also very well known in the public. And in terms of minority rights, quickly, again, I think this is down to the values of citizenship and how it would be perceived in a new constitution. If the constitution has been changed into better evaluation, better appreciation of the values of human rights and citizenship, I think they'll be much better off.
OK, in a moment we need to discuss Muslim Brotherhood and Islam and Islamists, but for the moment we're still with the floor. That's a good answer. At the end you can get those names written down. He'll stay. And he'll write them.
And with the public.
Yeah, my name is Saif Rabia. I'm Egyptian. I'm learning here. I'm doing my master's. Okay, I have basically one comment and one piece of news. Well, I will say them very briefly.
No, can I say welcome? How are you?
I'm actually very tired.
Use the microphone.
Yes, actually, I'm honestly finding a lot of difficulty to engage in this discussion intellectually because this is affecting my own family and people. So I will basically say two main comments.
Not yet. Tell us how it's affecting your family and your people.
As a matter of fact, now we don't have police forces in the streets. We are the Egyptian families are in themselves defending themselves and using their own men, using very basic things to defend themselves. And this is definitely a very critical situation. They are doing a great job, but it's not sustainable. It's by no way sustainable.
And have you spoken to your family?
Yes. And they are so far they are okay, but there are a lot of risks. One risk has to do with the fact that banks are still closed. People are not receiving their salaries or wages. And as a matter of fact, food resources and medicine are quite decreasing now, and they are diminishing, which is creating a very risky situation in the country. As a matter of fact, after the president's speech, a lot of people were actually in support to start getting this force down and to start getting people back to work and to start getting lives going on and again, and probably move the whole debate into a venue for negotiation rather than keeping it in this way. Okay, so for my comment, I want to say one comment on Osama Ghazali Harb and al-Barada'i and Ayman Noor. With all due respect, these are mere group of opportunists who do not deserve to rule Egypt. They do not deserve. They are using those who had been mobilized. They played no role in mobilizing those people. Those who mobilized those people are anonymous youth who had no political affiliations, no religious affiliations whatsoever. They were simply a group of youth, anonymous youth. They are not known, they had no political ambition, and all they seek is the welfare of their country. And I think if there is anything to do now, there should be some ways to develop those political activists in order to start playing a leading role in the coming phase. The political parties, if anyone knows the history of political parties in Egypt, they are all illegitimate political parties, and they have all accepted before a lot of tokenistic concessions, and they had never done any sacrifice, nothing that is worth that these youth have done, nothing, absolutely nothing, and they don't deserve anything. Now the Sayyid al-Badawi, the head of the Weft party, who is standing and saying to the people that we will not accept any concessions, this same person was accepting extremely tokenistic concessions at other phases of which he did not play any kind of role as a real political oppositional leader. Okay, I only want to add one thing. is that I received a piece of news on Facebook. For all those who are working in the journalism field, please connect this piece of information. Is that there are eyewitnesses who confirmed on the ground that the pro-Mubarak protesters today confessed that they were either paid from 50 to 100 Egyptian pounds, and that a lot of others were caught with police IDs.
Right, and thank you for your update, and we'll all plug into the news. Are you proud of your country?
I am extremely proud of my country, and I'm extremely proud of I'm extremely proud of my country. I'm extremely proud of my people, but I'm now terribly worried. And I must say something also, that please, I would urge journalists working here to start asking for people who are missing, because there are a lot of people that are missing. We have about 100 youth who people do not know anything where they are, and now we need to start resuming our lives.
Right. Now, react, and then back to the room.
Quick comment. I'm 100% with you, and I completely agree with you. And those names I mentioned, first of all, I excluded Said al-Badawi for a reason, that he's not considered to be a real opposition leader. And those names actually, sorry if I was mistaken to say that, forgot to say that these were only, were meant to be in the transition period. I can't see any of these, and I said this actually in a recorded interview, and you can get back to it, saying that none of these deserve to be a president of Egypt, because this is much bigger than all of them. And I said also that this movement will generate leaders, but what I'm saying is that in these next few months, we would need someone there until the transition of power happens, and it must be someone who's obviously selected by the people.
David?
Just very quickly, I just want to say, I think your name's Saif, right? Yeah. Saif has got it exactly right, and I think those people that he's describing, they are the hope. If there is going to be a good outcome on this, there's those people, because it wasn't driven by the Muslim Brotherhood, even though we have to discuss it. It wasn't driven by those guys. Mohammed al-Baradei was interviewed while it was going on outside a Star Alliance lounge in some airport, going, oh yeah, of course, you know, I have to go back and save Egypt. I mean, come on. So those people are definitely the hope.
Okay, so we're going to the room, and we've got the Muslim Brotherhood to discuss. The gentleman there with the blue shirt, I think, is next. You can be second. And third there with the glasses.
Thank you. I think you partly answered the question.
Please
but
tell us your name and everything.
Payman from, and like my brother, I'm from Iran as well. I see quite a lot of parallels between the phases of the revolution, and this seems very familiar to me. So we had a similar type of Tahrir Square massacre in the early part of the revolution, and then it became a guerrilla warfare between the basically the students and the university students against the authorities. My question is, to what extent are the people in the schools and the universities, university campuses radicalized?
Okay,
will they stay, or do they have the steel to stay, or will they go back to their classes?
Do keep the microphone, and you can discuss it with one of the panelists. Would one of you like to discuss this with this gentleman?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, you know, a week ago, 10 days ago, nobody would have imagined that, you know, we'd be discussing what we're discussing today. So I don't think, you know, anybody can predict, you know, what's going to happen, whether it will turn into armed, you know.
Yeah, but his question is, to what extent are they radicalized? It's not a prediction. Do you know?
What we know is that they are angry. What radicalized? You mean religiously radicalized?
Well, what do you mean?
No, it's not actually. It's like a teenager who doesn't want to listen to his grandfather telling him what to do and how to live, and they basically will resist, you know. And in fact, my experience was that they go into a bubble where they don't really listen.
Now there is a division now between the people after yesterday's speech by Mubarak. People who think that, okay, let him stay till September and then we'll see afterwards, and the hardcore people who are saying no, he has to go now. It's difficult to say how much, you know, how much percent are these, and who will convince the other. It's all very volatile, and I will not make any bets on what's going to happen.
Do you give Mubarak credit for being so wily as to divide people with a delaying tactic? Is it in his position? Is he an amazing 82-year-old, or is he a hateful one?
Mubarak is a very stubborn man. And he has been quoted as saying, "I have a PhD in stubbornness." So, and yeah.
Jane, would you like to respond with our friend here? He's asking, how radicalised are the students?
I can't speak to that directly. What I can say is that I think the regime in Iran had more powerful weapons, both ideological and actual weapons, at its disposal. I think they were able to assert a claim to religious legitimacy that convinced some people, and they were to some extent able to undermine the protesters by saying they were serving a foreign agenda because Iran is under that foreign pressure. I don't see any equivalent of that in Egypt. Also, I don't see an equivalent of the kind of military force represented by people like the
Actually,
Revolutionary
I'm
Guards
talking
in
about
Iran
79.
with the regime.
Actually, I'm talking about 1979 rather than the last year's uprising, 2 years ago.
I can't make that comparison. I don't know enough about 79.
All right, so we'll park that for now. In 10 minutes at 8, let's turn to the Muslim Brotherhood, but now we'll go to your question.
My name's Mohammed Darwish. I'm half Egyptian, half English, a journalist doing masters in journalism in City. I just wanted to come back to the earlier point, actually, about none of these leaders deserving to be president. Do the panel believe that they need a leader? I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood have put their support behind al-Baradei until because he has publicly stated that he wants to transition Egypt towards a true democracy. Whilst they may not be the ideal candidates, do the panel believe that they at least serve as an alternative to Mubarak, and they can transition them to a true democracy?
Davis, Jane?
I mean, I think exactly what you want now is a leader who doesn't want to cling to power.
I can only agree with that. I mean, I think it's yeah. I'll leave it at that.
In addition to these two comments, the constitution should be considered in this question, I think, and even myself have cited Real Baradei and other names. I think constitutionally they don't really have a chance to be a president, because you have either the vice president, the head of the parliament, or the head of the Supreme Court. So in terms of constitutionally, if it will be considered, which has many times been ignored, none of them have a chance.
You've got the microphone. How long is Mubarak going to... You're half Egyptian. What does your half Egyptian side say? How long is he going to stay?
It's really difficult for me to say. I mean, it's changing minute by minute. I genuinely thought that yesterday... Actually, I genuinely thought Friday he was going to announce his abdication. I was so depressed when... I mean, I'm speaking as a citizen rather than a journalist here. But then I thought last night he was, finished. That was it. I can't say. Genuinely.
Do you want a change with no one there to take over? That's the argument that's being had by the room. If there's no one to take over, if he leaves, is that good or bad?
I believe that the people who've organised this uprising are genuinely educated middle class. I mean, we're talking about it being spread by Twitter and Facebook. The people who use Twitter and Facebook are educated middle class in Egypt.
But they're not running the place.
But they're not running the place, but they are educated. I believe that if they're educated enough to be as organised and as efficient as they've been up until now, they're organised and efficient enough to at least start a motion towards democracy.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Max Krahe. I'm an economic analyst from Germany, and I'd like to ask two slightly critical questions. Firstly, to what extent do you think these protests are driven by kind of more economic concerns, really, by young, normal people caring about their futures, about their kind of job and life prospects, really? And
Use the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. So to what extent are they driven by normal people, fears of their life prospects, and how do you think does that affect fundamental change coming out of that? Second question is, how deep do you think the West's commitment to democracy is in a scenario where, say, elections come about and Islamist parties win? Do you think we would see a 2006 Palestinian election scenario, or do you think...
Okay, so Muslim Brotherhood at 8, West, we'll do the West at 8:10. And you're going first.
I'll come in on the second part first, because I think it's easier. I think the answer is not deep at all. I mean, we haven't seen any evidence that the West is committed to democracy in Egypt before. So on the economic side, definitely economic grievances were very important here, the unemployment and the inflation. But it's hard to separate those from political dissatisfaction. There's a general sense of injustice and a perception that the economy was being managed by an elite that was managing it in a way that was disadvantaging most people, but making a few people very rich. So, for instance, inflation has completely bucked the global trend in Egypt. When world food prices were going down, food prices in Egypt were going up. That has a lot to do with monopolies. It has a lot to do with who owns the land, who controls things like the supply of tomatoes. So I think it's very much an interplay. Solving the economic problems, though, is going to be a massive challenge for any government. I think there is a worry now about investment in Egypt being deterred. thousands and thousands of jobs need to be created. Whoever comes next is going to have to face that.
I think I'll only comment on the democracy commitment aspect, which probably we'll discuss under the West as well at 10 past. But the
Till
point,
11 past.
the point being, I would probably agree. I mean, it's a complicated issue, but I would probably agree. If you look at what happened under Bush around 2003 with the first sort of drive for democracy in the Middle East, Mubarak pushed back very hard. That was it. Other areas were in flames. They didn't really have time to deal with somebody who was holding up reasonably steadily. I think that's the reductionist way.
Okay, nothing much to add there? No, right. Yes, you with the microphone.
I don't have a mic.
Well, you should have. No, you can't. Do give us the benefit of your name.
My name's Claire, and I'm a journalist formerly of Al Jazeera English in Doha. I'm just interested to know if the panel think that, or has any evidence that Iran or Syria have been making any overtures towards the protesters in any of the Middle Eastern countries where we've seen recent demonstrations.
Let's deal with the two gentlemen who didn't speak earlier.
Okay, Iran. There was a statement by the foreign minister saying that what has happened in Tunisia and Egypt is a start of a transformation to an Islamic Middle East. This was Iran's position. Syria, Bashar al-Assad described what is happening as a disease, and he said that Syria is immune to this disease. So I think this pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, not much to add actually, but saying I think the Iranian comment, or the official Iranian comment, basically reflects, or should be a sufficient evidence that he himself, the establishment in Iran, realized that actually that it's not the same case, and there's no Islamist takeover, and there's no Islamic State, because when Ahmadinejad or like when the establishment in Iran speaks this language, you should completely believe the opposite. So.
Hi, my name is Nora El Ghouli. I'm Tunisian, and I'm involved in starting a new political party in Tunisia. And I first of all, I want to say that what's happening in Egypt strikes us as déjà vu. We've seen everything blow by blow, and it's a repeat of the exact identical scenario. And I guess we're one step ahead, just 2-3 weeks ahead of what's happening in Egypt. And my comment or question to the media is, when are you going to start looking at what happens next? Because we're in what's happening next right now. Our tyrant is gone, and we have a very long road ahead towards democracy. We have not only to change the constitution, we have to establish an electoral system, we have to educate our population to what it means to be pluralist. We have to, overhaul the media. We have all sorts of transitional justice issues around the, So all of these things are not being followed at all by the media, and I'm wondering why.
Okay, there's two journalists on the panel. I'll ask them. What's your party called? What's its main manifesto? You've got 1 minute. No, you haven't. You've got 15 seconds to tell us. What's your platform for Tunisia?
We just got started 2 weeks ago, so I don't feel...
Well, don't blame us then.
Yeah.
Wait, you tell us. What's the thing you want? What's your platform?
Defense of democracy, that's the first thing we need to work on.
Under whom? Which leader in Tunisia?
Someone who's going to have to be identified, because at the moment it's exactly the same situation as Egypt. There are a few people who've been mothballed for 20 years.
Okay, so the two journalists, why are you ignoring this platform?
I guess we're not ignoring it. We publish reports on Tunisia every month, but certainly Egypt's a huge world-beating story. Our two correspondents from Egypt rushed back from Tunisia to cover the next revolution. I do think it's very, very important. A lot of things do seem quite similar. And it is impressive, I think, that in Tunisia there's stability on the streets was restored really quite quickly. Progress was made really quite fast. I think investment is not going to be as badly deterred as possibly it is going to be in Egypt. So I think there are lessons to learn.
Mohammed, have you taken your eye off the ball because of Egypt and you've forgotten Tunisia and what's happening there?
No, as a journalist, of course, we in our editorial meetings, we struggle with this because, at one point you struggle between, making premature assumptions that, domino is going to happen and all hell is going to break loose everywhere. And at the same time, there is realities on the ground that point that there is a fundamental change happening in the Middle East. The ideal outcome of this, of course, is to have, whether in Tunisia or Egypt or anywhere else, is to build infrastructure of a working society, civil society that is functioning. I wouldn't worry about under who or who would be the leader. For instance, 5-6 years ago, who knew about anything about Barack Obama? For instance, I mean, leaders, evolve
and just for the journalists in the room, if we want to find out about your party, is it the Parti Républicain de Tunisie?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And you'll be in the room and you can meet journalists at the end. So it's 8 o'clock. Now, you all wanted to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. We'll take the panellists' views on this for 5 minutes and then turn to the room. Would you like to start? And we'll go down and tell us why you wanted to talk about it and what we need to know, because we've come for your briefing.
Okay. These guys are probably better informed than me. I mean, my impression is that the Brotherhood has been quite divided in recent years, that the government has been quite successful at dividing basically all the opposition parties, and that goes also for the Brotherhood. I met in November with a young guy, a business strategy consultant, whose grandfather had been a supreme spiritual leader of the Brotherhood, but he had recently resigned, saying basically they have no strategy. And he was saying we're divided between people who see basically 3 broad trends. One is participation in politics, the other is preaching and social work, and the third, which amazed me, was he said maybe we could be something like AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which did make me laugh out loud. And he said no, not like AIPAC, but a kind of lobby group that is powerful, that has influence without necessarily being kind of part of the political institutions. They did exhibit a real lack of strategy when it came to contesting the recent parliamentary elections. They had until then had quite a strong alliance with al-Baradei, even when somebody or other circulated pictures of al-Baradei's daughter in a swimsuit. The Brotherhood were mature enough to say this doesn't really matter, we're working together for political reform. But when al-Baradei called for a boycott of the elections, the Brotherhoods participated. Wasn't clear why. The elections were rigged. It was obvious in advance they were going to be rigged. Halfway through, they pulled out, saying, "Gosh, they're rigged." Frankly, I think that what Saif was saying about the sudden emergence of these unknown young people is in a way embarrassing to the Brotherhood. Yes, maybe they can take advantage of the changes, but I think if I was one of their supporters, I would be asking why weren't you able to achieve this?
Let me just talk about some basic first principles very briefly. The ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, which I have had the opportunity to study closely, whether you're a Muslim, even more so whether you're a Westerner, but actually it's the same thing. You're a Muslim, you're a Westerner, you're anything in between. The ideologically of the Muslim Brotherhood is the road to totalitarianism and a grave danger. There is a struggle in the Middle East between forces that will allow an Islam to flourish whilst at the same time accommodating themselves to being integrated into the global community. I don't want to talk about lofty goals and whatever, but there is a clear struggle. We can all see it. The Iranians are on one side. Why are they telling Mubarak to fall? Why are they hoping that he'll fall? Because they believe that they will be joined in that struggle by what will come after him, i.e. the Muslim Brotherhood. Forget Sunni, forget Shia, forget the divisions. There is an ideological division between that kind of Islamism that is the road to totalitarianism, make no mistake, and the kind of other Islam that we see perhaps, in Southeast Asia, and so on and so forth. And if you are on the wrong side of that debate, then we have a problem, in my view, because I think you need to be on the right side of that debate. That's all I want to say about that.
In addition to these two comments, I would add briefly that the Muslim Brotherhood are considered to be conservative, even though I don't really like these labels, but in perspective to the rest of Egyptian society, which actually, in my view, I would label as a Muslim secular society. The Muslim Brotherhood are minority, and we don't really have obviously official numbers of how large they are, but the estimates are between, I'm talking about the protesters in the street and the role in what's happening now, not more than 25% in the best case scenario. They don't have more than 25% representation in the street today. The official statement actually in the 24th of January, Wednesday 24th of January, the day before the protest, were the official statement saying we are not taking part on today's protest. 2 days later, they obviously had to join because everybody else had joined. If they haven't joined, they've been called traitor, unpatriotic, and all this. They had to join because they didn't have another choice. Do they have a role? Did they inspire this? Are they going to take over this? It's obviously quite big questions, but my short answers, they did not inspire this. They had a minimal role, like as individuals more than as a group. The role they're playing now is as big as any other group. They might have a larger, obviously, organizational skills than others, but by no means do they represent Islam, not only in Southeast Asia, actually, but Islam even in the rest of Egypt. Because Egypt, as I really would like to underline this statement quite clearly, the vast majority of Egyptians, of Muslim Egyptians, I mean, are not between National Democratic Party, which is Mubarak regime, and Muslim Brotherhood. The vast majority of Egyptians are neither of these. They are ordinary Egyptians, have been politically passive for quite a long time, I have to admit. I will take some time to create this credibility and this trust in the future. And the future of what will happen in the takeover, I think that might take a longer time than what I'm allowed at the moment. So we'll push that for in a couple of minutes, I think.
Okay, I agree with the estimates made by various scholars that their real weight in the society is not more than 25, maximum 30% of the society. So they are still a minority. And I mean, if you look back in Egypt in the 80s, the Muslim Brotherhood were almost non-existent. The appeal at that time was to a more hardline form of Salafi Islam. At the time, there was the war in Afghanistan, and this trend was being encouraged. And there was the more fundamentalist type in the late 80s and through the 90s. And actually, the appeal of the Muslim Brotherhood is, I think, because of the injustices and the poverty, and they played a lot of role in providing, cheap medical facilities, cheap tuition, things like that. So they are benefiting from the imbalances and the problems in the Egyptian society.
And are they being bypassed? Whatever benefits they did in the past, are they dinosaurs? Because the new group is younger, motivated by the internet, is on the streets throwing rocks. And where are the Muslim Brotherhood? Is there a risk they're going to be bypassed, or will it all settle down the longer it drags out? Again, my question about Mubarak's strategy, the longer this drags on, people become hungry, and your family, it sounds like it. Is the threat to the Muslim Brotherhood now, and it retreats with time?
Yes, because first of all, they cannot claim this uprising because it was done by young people from all sects. The other thing is that there are divisions inside the Muslim Brotherhood themselves between the young generation and the old guards.
James Thacker, I wrote an 800-page book with the Algerian Revolution at the center, and also represented Vanuna for Index and Censorship in front of the Israeli Supreme Court. Can I address the question of Egyptian exceptionalism? The Persian Don at Cambridge once said to me that the will of the Arab people was broken when the Mamelukes were defeated by Napoleon. Egypt is separate. It's not just on the Israeli border. It is a different character. Egyptian people, I mean, as you say, there are different characters in each of these areas. Is whether the question of Muslim Brotherhood is potent in Arabia, whether or not it's important that there are alternatives, whether we get Mubarak again, whether we get Suleiman, whether Suleiman is close to Hamas, all of that will depend on the character of the Egyptian people. Is it different? Is it qualitatively different? Is it, in fact, the most important Arab country in terms of the fate of Islam from one end to the other?
Keep the microphone, and who wants to... It's called the mother of the world, I believe, in Arabic. So the Egyptians think it is.
Egyptians only, I think, but quite proudly, though, I would say, as an Egyptian. But we're happy with what we call ourselves. In terms of, obviously, its influence in the region is obviously quite undeniable. In terms of its influence on the perception of Islam in the region, I have to say has been minimalized in the last few decades with the Saudi money and the Wahhabi production of certain narrative of Islam. And I would say there is a small minority of Egyptians who have unfortunately adhered to this more conservative, so-called Wahhabi interpretation of Islam. But keeping in mind that Egypt is an 85 million people nation, and they have hundreds of I wouldn't say hundreds, but they have a large number of divisions within the understanding of Islam and different interpretations of Islam. Yes, it is, I would say, at the end. The bottom line will be it is down to the Egyptian character. And now what we see is actually a nationalist revival where the old pictures of resistance, even though like people call what's happening now resistance to the Egyptian occupation.
But there's shared, because we know it, but the Tunisians got there first. So it's not that Egyptian, it's more Tunisian. Where were these feelings before the people of Tunisia, who aren't Egyptian, expressed fear and loathing? What were the Egyptians doing then with their separate identity?
They were sleeping, I have to say. They were asleep. The Tunisian effect is undeniable. I mean, that's not to say the Tunisian effect is not there, but the rhetoric you see, again, from this generation on Facebook is incredibly nationalist. As if, like, when you hear about how they talk about the NDP, you think it's still, we are, again, like the Mamluks and the French. Like, the rhetoric is like, this is an occupation, and we have to free our country, and sentimental songs, and all this is coming back again, and it's all very secular. I mean,
I just said, I've been told by an Iranian colleague that people in Iran, when they look at the Middle East, they only see, you know, a big pyramid, which is Egypt, and they don't see the other countries. But even the character of Egypt is evolving and changing. It's not something set in stone. You have to remember that out of the population of 80 million, now there are 17 million who have access to the internet, and it's changing them.
Hi, my name is Mais Albaya. I'm Iraqi journalist, and I was in Iraq during the invasion and after that. I'm just worried about the idea that we don't have a solid candidate to run Egypt, and I'm worried that it's going to be the same scenario in Iraq, like what happened in Iraq, that we didn't have any person who can really lead Iraq, and that led to the division. Do you think the scenario is going to return again in Egypt? Do you think it's going to happen the same thing in Egypt? I mean, taking the part of course, the coalition forces being in Iraq.
Go on. Stunned them into silence.
I mean, I think Egypt hasn't had quite the bad luck that Iraq has had in the last 30 years. You know, the history, the sanctions, the various wars, the proliferation of weapons, the extent of the corruption. I think, unfortunately, your country has suffered a lot worse. So I do find it hard to see those kinds of problems being mirrored in Egypt.
Yes, to you in the front here.
Well, basically,
would you give us the benefit of your name?
Amira Mohsen. I'm also Egyptian. Basically, I'm answering that statement. Is that I think that it's premature to sort of worry about replacements of the regime. Like saying that we need to put something in place is basically fear mongering. Democracy never came to any country, overnight. I mean, you can even look at great democracies like the UK, like France, like America. It took years. So, I mean, I fully expect that with any protest or any revolution, Egypt's going to go through a lot of problems and upheaval for months, for years, perhaps. But, people saying, like, particularly our government, the NDP, saying that, if you don't find a replacement, we're going to go the same way as Iraq or something, is fear-mongering. We really need to just, bite the bullet and go for it.
Hi, my name is Ayman Ramzi, press analyst. The question I have is that the AKP party in Turkey, the ruling party, they came from under the umbrella of the Muslim Brotherhood. They seem to have done quite well by all measures. And so the question is, why is everyone running scared of the Muslim Brotherhood?
I think you answer your question quite well there. Look at the Davutoglu foreign policy. If you're sitting as a Western policymaker inside NATO about what happened with Iran and so on and so forth, that's why you're worried, because they are doing quite well and they're doing things that you consider to be counterproductive to the kinds of things that you're trying to achieve. I noticed there was a big speech. I only had time to read a little bit today, very, very supportive of the protesters. And I'm not surprised that he came out in that way. But I think you answer your own question in terms of why we're worried.
I mean, they've done well for their own population. That's the main thing. Forget foreign policy. They've done well for their own population. That's their priority.
It's the best case you can find of a Islamist or moderate or Islamist light government that has been really successful economically.
Because they're the only one. The only one who came to power. No one else.
What's your point for the rest of us then?
What I'm saying is no one has given the Brotherhood in the Arab world a chance even to run anything. So, and yet...
Mubarak hasn't given anyone a chance to run anything.
What I'm saying is generally, I'm talking about generally. I mean, why the ideology is so feared while it hasn't been put to the test.
Okay. Do you want us to talk about the West? How the West sees this? Because I want us to talk about that in about 5 minutes. You. Yes, lady. Please give us your name.
Okay. Mina Toksos. I'm a Turkish economist. I agree with the sentiments of that last the last contribution, and I think that the panelists were slightly underestimating the potential of Muslim Brotherhood to come to the fore very quickly. In Turkey, you had years of very deep secular reforms, and, within 10 years, you have a very Islamized society now. And so it's a question about how strong is secularism in Egypt and that kind of dynamic.
Okay, keep the microphone in case you disagree with our panellists, but would you like to pick on one of them?
Well, the Egyptian ones.
The Egyptian one.
Do you want to go Egyptian one?
Okay. So long as we don't use their names, no one will ever know.
I mean, from the way I see it, looking at the Muslim Brotherhood, I don't see in their agenda or their literature anything that indicates to me that they have enough caliber of people and enough expertise, enough political skill to form a government on their own. I'm not counting them out completely of the equation. They could be a part of any democratic system in any country as long as they respect the rules of the rule of the game. But from my point of view, that in Egypt they cannot do it at the moment.
Please reply.
Yeah. The point about the rise of the AK party in Turkey was that they were catapulted and supported by the rise of a business class in Anatolia. They had a social base. And here we have Egypt, which has been undergoing privatization for the past 20 years. There's a middle class there, which probably resents the cronies around Mubarak and are looking for an option and a political answer to represent them. So I'm saying that Muslim Brotherhood could be the political actor that represents the small, medium-sized, newly emerging private sector in Egypt.
So it's, in other words, what we heard from the panel, it's at least 25% and growing in your analysis.
I would say, if you want to compare it to the Turkish experience, as you said that. For example, it's completely different historical process because Turkey has gone hardcore secular process, while actually Egypt hasn't had this experience at all. So that's why it might sound a bit reasonable to have an Islamist party coming out after long as a reaction to this secular process. While in Egypt, actually, back to your question, which I think is quite an important question, how strong secularism is in Egypt. Before this, I had a quick question, what does secularism mean in Egypt? And I think definitions here are a bit tricky, because if you talk about Western, Tunisian, Turkian style of secularism, you would not find this in Egypt. You would have a day-to-day secularism, as in people are quite religious, devoted, they care about. Religion plays a core element in the identity, nationalist, Islamic identity, while at the same time they do not think Sharia law, or like what is actually, I have to say, the West obsessed with the word Sharia laws quite often, doesn't mean anything to them. Because there was one point, legal codes in Egypt are composed in harmony between Islamic law, French and Belgian laws, and most people are quite happy with it.
But you're giving the lady an analysis. She's telling you you're underestimating the potential. Are you disagreeing with her, or would you admit that you might be?
I don't think we're underestimating. I think we should give them their own size, and I will agree with Mohammed. They would be part of our coalition. They would represent about 20 to 30%. They've been successful so far as 30%, but I think in the future they might actually diminish, because we'll have the other groups speaking up.
Okay, so now we've got 10 minutes left. If you're not hearing why you came in the room, please let me know. Let's talk a bit about the West, take some comments from the audience as well. You're going to be the first question. The analysis is it's not about us, it's about them, and I've seen it written that this is about putting the foot on the throat of young people for 30 years and their parents, and it's so much repressed anger coming out. It's less about the West, but then we see it through our prism, as this gentleman in the audience is saying. Would you like to say where the West is? It seemed to be behind Barack Obama doesn't know whether he's Martha or Arthur, it seems, of working out what to say. Would you like to put it in your terms, more eloquent than mine, about where is the West, having supported all this, now that it's collapsing?
I think a lot of people that are tweeting and blogging from the protests are asking why the West hasn't done more, going back for years and years. There's a kind of recurring scene that you see on American news where people pick up tear gas canisters that say "Made in the USA" on the bottom, show them to the camera and say, why is this happening? I think Obama, within the language of international diplomacy, it sounds like he is calling for Mubarak to go now. He's talking about an orderly transition which needs to begin now. But if you're in the street and you're having American tear gas canisters thrown at you, you're probably not hearing that message very well. So I think there is a big resentment that's got so bad that even some people have nostalgia for some of the things that Bush said.
Talking about nostalgia for what Bush said, I wonder what Bush is thinking on his ranch right now, where he's, suddenly whether he's feeling vindicated. But the reality is that the West has been caught. I don't want to use that analogy, but Obama has been caught sleeping at the wheel. Let's use that analogy. In a way, I think, as I said before, that the reality is that there should have been attention paid to this, despite the point that it wasn't a flashpoint. That is the important part. You look after those parts in a difficult region in the world that poses one of your greatest challenges. If we think back even only a couple of years, we were all extremely worried. You look after those points, and I think that the principle behind the democratization and democracy as a more stable long-term investment than propping up dictators is unassailable. And I think that it's frankly disgraceful what happened when the Obama administration came in, that it just dropped it, like, as if it's okay to let these people fester. You said at the start, people realize we don't have to live like this. Exactly. But they don't have to live like this.
Does anyone else in the room record the Cairo speech that Obama gave 2 years ago? Someone in the audience shouted, "We love you, Barack Obama," in Cairo University. You weren't there as a student, I believe.
No, I wasn't there. I was here, but but I remember it quite well, and I remember this voice quite well as well. I agree actually with Davis, with obviously now the regret that. Feeding up all this dictatorship now, the West would have to reconsider the future policies in the region. But I would like also to voice up some of the people in Egypt now in regarding to the West. They don't really care much actually now about the West and what they think, because they think this is a completely domestic issue, and they think if we would get support from the West, and we hoped Obama and Cameron and the others will speak up and support the people, which they know they're not going to do as blunt as we want them to do. They're more caught up with actually what they are doing inside, and Paddy going to speak with the American ambassador in Cairo the other day was interpreted by people in the street as, here you go, he's another American puppet, and we're a bit scared actually of what will happen in the future.
Perfectly understandable the image of the Arab leaders as puppets, but there was a very interesting and strange scene in yesterday's demonstration in Tahrir Square. A group of people were standing there chanting against anti-Mubarak slogans very passionately, and then they burned an Israeli flag. And to me it was very strange, and it really, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want from the West? What do we want from the outside world? If a big demonstration was to take place tomorrow in Jordan, is Obama supposed to overthrow the king? This is, I think this is in the hands of the people now. The people have to decide what they want, and forget about the West, forget about Israel, decide what they want for the future, and then get on with it.
And as we come to you, if you kindly gave up your time, if you're not hearing why you came in, now's the time to have a go at the panel before they leave. So would you like to have a go?
Hi, Emmanuel Delisposti, I'm a freelancer. I would say that for many Westerners who have been watching the protests in both Tunisia and Egypt and across the rest of the Arab world, as you say, the domino effect, one of the surprising things, or perhaps positive things about it, is the lack of, say, Islamist or very strongly religious movements within the protests, and to what extent, linking that, so that links back to the Muslim Brotherhood, and also within the West, to what extent does the Westerners' bogeyman of Islamism post 9/11 and the effects that has had on foreign policy across the world, how much does this undermine the West's role in in the world over the past decade?
I think, it was particularly striking in Tunisia that it really wasn't an Islamist-led uprising. I think there are big questions to be asked about to what extent is it true, the scenario that most people forecasting in the West have had in their heads, that any revolutions would be favouring the Islamists. Against that, I would say that, a lot of secular or leftist opposition groups also have ideas that wouldn't necessarily fit completely with US interests. So, for instance, if you look at the attitudes towards Israel, I think you would find across a lot of different Egyptian opposition groups that they're very, very critical of Israel, maybe not as deeply ideological as the Muslim Brotherhoods, but I think it's, Western interests are not just going to be about the Islamists.
I think the...
Could you like to give us your name, do you mind?
Oh, my name's Jim, by the way.
Hello, Jim.
I think... You're right. I think the reaction of the Western leaders to all these tensions in Egypt is almost one of annoyance, it seems, because I think as far as they were concerned, Mubarak, despite his ways, he was a safe pair of hands. And after the Yom Kippur War, they didn't really have to worry about much in Egypt. And I think all of this hype going on around the Muslim Brotherhood is just Westerners projecting fears over what's going to turn in the Middle East, and they're worried about who the new guy's going to be.
Right.
And this is particularly Israel's fear, because they had it cosy pretty much with Mubarak.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to propose is that panellists, you compose some closing thoughts for us. We'll hear from the audience and wrap together what you're hearing, and including any points that you didn't cover. Yes, you next, and then to you in the grey.
My name is Scott Bollinger. I'm a political analyst focusing mainly on Iran, but I lived in Egypt for a year. I just wanted to make one comment about this intelligence failure supposedly from the West, and it's that we have to remember that politics is always changing. It's never static. And I was just talking about this with Iran. Somebody was telling me, well, the Green Movement's completely dead. No, there's a big loss of legitimacy there. Something will happen. Same thing with these Arab states. The governments will tend towards something more stable. Whether the way they get there is stable or not is a different question. But I think we have to bear that in mind and start from that point that politics will evolve and is evolving.
No, grey man.
Scott Johnson, I'm an analyst. Although our previous conscript, I don't know your name, commentator sympathized that the army is for the people and that's why they will remain neutral. What I want to know is, does anyone see their neutrality to be short-lived? They seem to be that seems to be an important breaking point right now.
Please put that in your closing remarks. And you've had one. So that's it. Closing comments from the panel. We'll run this to time because everyone's busy. But thank you very much. You've worked very hard as an audience, I think. Would you like to go? We'll go in this direction. Okay. And just for the record, this is Mohammed Yahya from the BBC Online Arabic.
Okay, in short, no. I don't think this neutrality would break. There is the presidential guard, which is sort of like Mubarak's bodyguards, and they would defend him, if somebody would try to storm his palace. But generally speaking, I do not think the army would break its neutrality.
Your closing comments for us?
My closing comment is just something interesting that Henry Kissinger yesterday said on Channel 4 about why the US was propping Mubarak, and he reminded that when Sadat did the peace treaty with Israel, and Egypt shifted from being a Soviet ally to being a US ally, and then Sadat was assassinated shortly afterwards, and Mubarak came. At the time, the US was very happy to have him as a friend, and it stayed that way. And there was the policy was built on having him as a friend and tolerating him and seeing him as a safe pair of hands. But all of this is, I think, being shattered now, and we're about to witness, totally new realities in the Middle East.
Thank you. And to you, Mustafa, if you would give us your closing view.
I think the region is changing. I think politicians from the region and from the Middle East and from the West should start developing new agendas and new policy for the region. Few quick comments about the Islamism question. if Western governments want to have more credibility among the people in the street, they should actually cooperate with democratic secular leaders, not dictator secular leaders. Then they will have credibility, and they will have stability, and they will have democracy as well considered. The issue of the people from now so on, I think they will hopefully start to develop political culture, and that will take generations. Sorry, I can't remember your name. As the lady here said earlier, that this will take few years actually to develop. Those uprisings, or those revolts, or those changes, again, I would have to stress, they are secular changes. They are for no ideological religious reasons. And actually, if you put this in perspective into violent Islamism, like Al-Qaeda and other hardcore violent groups, those uprisings and those changes actually overturn the narrative of Al-Qaeda entirely, because they make it possible that actually secular revolutions or secular changes are doable. And you don't really have to blow up yourself in the tube to change something. People could do it with their own voices.
Well, the Chinese say you should hope not to live in interesting times, and these are definitely interesting times. What I would say is it's about the opening up of a space. This is not about Western fears put into the region. This is about a space having opened up and there being a real risk that it's filled with this kind of regime that would be very troublesome. But overall, you can't help but, in a sense, be extremely excited, because the reality is the Iranian regime knows since those protests that its days are numbered. And now, across the entire Middle East, the dictators know that this isn't working anymore. Surely, in the long run, that's a good thing.
I think we've heard a lot of optimism, which is very exciting. At the same time, as you said, probably it will be a difficult and slow transition. Even today we hear possibly 300 people are dead. I think one of the risks, we talked about the Western policy, another of the risks does come from the attitude of the other states in the region. Probably most of the governments in the region are not desperate to see a well-functioning democracy in Egypt or Tunisia. It's been quite convenient that they've been able to point to Palestine, Lebanon and Iraq as the most democratic countries in the region, but ones that are also undergoing some of the most serious conflicts. Having said all that, I think one of the most positive things that I heard is really the idea that people are thinking more about what they can do for themselves, not just blaming the leaders, and actually not just blaming the West, and realising that they do have some power to change things themselves.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. We came for a briefing, and from the audience side, thank you for everything you've done tonight. Your second part of your question was very much worth waiting for, to our friend here. Thank you very much. And all of your questions, I hope it was broadly where you wanted to know. To hear from someone who's been in the Egyptian army, yourself from the Quilliam Foundation, a big movement here in the UK, your analysis, and you two leaping around all the countries, I've learnt something. We've been trying to contact Tariq Osman, you might have noticed, by Skype, and it's not, what is it, Millie? It's not working, or he's not answering? He's not answering, so maybe we can all get through and hear more from people if you have contacts there. But from all of us listening to you in the audience, thank you very much, and to you for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you.